Oh, hello! I'm Scott Blakely with Blakely Bassoon Studios and Lil Ass Kicker's Bassoon Reeds. Welcome to my three-part video series on how I use power tools to make bassoon reeds.
Power tools, making reeds with power tools, they're so cool. Bassoon reeds with power tools.
In my last video, I discussed how I use a rotary tool to put in a tip bevel, also known as a chisel tip. But when we talk about putting a bevel in our reeds, bassoonists more often think about a bevel going in the back of the tube. A butt bevel, if you will. There's actually a few different reasons why people bevel their butts. The first one that I learned was that it simply allows the two pieces of cane to join at a flat surface, and this helps seal the tube. I think that's stupid. Another reason is that the bevel creates somewhat of a fulcrum, allowing the tip of the reed to stay more open, which can in turn affect the way we adjust our wires and intonation, response, all those wonderful things. I always like to start with what I call a long bevel. I'm not going to use the rotary tool for this. It's just a few strokes on 220 grit sandpaper on each side of the tube for the entire length of the tube. The reason I do this is it kind of flattens out this edge, so hopefully it'll sit flatter and be less likely for the blades to slip. I think that's stupid. I'm not convinced that the long bevel is that useful, but it's so quick to do that, I do it unless I forget. And then when I forget, I don't cry about it. One of the things that's really tricky about the short bevel, especially if we're going to be using a rotary tool or a Dremel, is that we really want to get it consistent and symmetrical. So if you're new at this especially, you can eyeball it. That's honestly what I'm usually doing, but I want to be legit for you guys on the internet. I measure, it was right there, right? That was 1 centimeter. I measure 1 centimeter. I'm actually not going to go a whole centimeter on each side. I'm going to go just below that. But 1 centimeter is easy for me to read, and therefore it's easier for me to be consistent in my marking. I picked this trick up from a YouTube video that Trent Jacobs put out. It's like less than 10 seconds. I'm just going to explain it a little bit more. I have a 240 grit sanding drum here. My off-brand rotary tool, I use its lowest speed setting. Sometimes I've used its second to lowest speed setting, but I think this is ideal. So, as you can see, like there's no bevel here. If I push on the blades, actually if I push really hard, you can start to see it lift there. Isn't that interesting? Even without a bevel. What's difficult about using this tool is that it's a little hard to tell exactly where I'm starting my bevel. And the other thing is if I'm angled, or if I have more pressure, then it's going to take off unevenly. So I really try to be careful to use even pressure and just lightly give it like probably 2 passes on each side usually. And then let's check that out. Well, that didn't do anything. Let's up the speed. So now we're at 10,000 RPM. I do have a bit of a bevel forming, but it just doesn't look that even. Although it's doing its job when I push on the tip. I do get an opening, but it's actually not as big as I want it to be just yet. Let's do one more pass. Let's see how much of a bevel. Okay, now we're getting more of a bevel. There we go. All right, so there you see my bevel. If I squeeze on the back end, it starts to lift the front end. But this isn't actually doing it very much. So I'm not particularly happy with this method of beveling yet. The reality is this might save me, I don't know, 15 to 25 seconds per reed. But, you know, it's something you could try, and if you wanted to practice, theoretically makes sense. As I said, what's really difficult is to get this bevel at a consistent length and actually an even taper. So that got me thinking, gosh, you know, whereas before I would just take a piece of sandpaper and kind of go like this on my bevel, which just works pretty well. But again, when I'm doing this, I'm still eyeballing just how deep I go, right? Well, I just screwed two pieces of wood together. Now this is about 11 centimeters here. Centimeters? My ideal bevel is 9 centimeters. Millimeters! What happens is, when I use my little setup here, I'm always going to be going to a very consistent spot, right? And if you think about it, the very end of the bevel here, you know, about 11 millimeters deep. Millimeters, exactly. Isn't getting a lot of cane taken off because it's barely scraping against any sandpaper, whereas at the back, it travels further against the paper. And therefore, I'm getting taking more off the further back I go. This is why I like this method, by the way, better than using a file, because I can do that taper automatically. Now let's see how well I can do it while I'm got a camera in front of my face and all the pressure of literally tens of YouTubers possibly watching this. Okay. Yeah, I think I could take a tad more off. Just a tad. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. Look at that. Look at that. That's a good bevel. It doesn't take much time. This seems to be a much more effective method for beveling, in my opinion, but I wouldn't have thought of it if I hadn't f***ed around with this bad boy. So that's the twist. While I no longer use a power tool for this stage of the reed making process, my reed making has greatly improved because I tried using a power tool. As with music, as in life, sometimes we learn from our mistakes or our experimentation. We grow from being non-traditional. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Did you want to keep watching? You know what you could do, right? Subscribe.
My sister-in-law can hear me.
A butt bevel, if you will.